The night Naomi Brooks walked between a loaded gun and her mother's chest, she was 4 years old, wearing yellow star pajamas, and holding a stuffed giraffe named Gerald. The man pointing that gun had killed 11 people. He was 6'3", 260 pounds of scar tissue and bad decisions, and he had never once hesitated in his life. He hesitated then, because a child crossed her arms, looked straight up into his face, and said 7 words that no criminal in Seoul had ever said to him before. "Let him go, or deal with me." The Empire stopped breathing. If you're watching this from your city, drop it in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button and stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power, loyalty, and what it truly means to be brave. The gates of the Kong estate had not been built for beauty. They were built for the same reason everything Junseo Kong had ever constructed was built, to keep the wrong people out, and to remind the right people exactly where they stood. 16 feet of black reinforced steel, hydraulic-driven pressure sensor pads buried in the concrete approach, 4 cameras angled to catch every blind spot. The estate itself sat on a private hillside 40 minutes north of central Seoul, the kind of address that did not appear on maps, the kind of neighborhood where the other residents had learned long ago not to ask questions about the black SUVs that moved in and out at unusual hours. From the outside, it looked like old money. From the inside, it was something else entirely. Junseo Kong was 41 years old. He had a jaw like quarried stone, dark eyes that absorbed light rather than reflected it, and the particular stillness of a man who had learned early that showing emotion was a form of suicide. He ran the Kang Syndicate, which was what the people who feared it called it, and he had built it from a single debt collection operation in Incheon when he was 23 into the most sophisticated criminal network in East Asia. Financial infrastructure, logistics, political favors, real estate, and underneath all of it, moving like water through cracks in stone, the things that could not be discussed in polite company. He was not a man given to sentiment. He was not a man given to softness. But on the morning that this story truly begins, a Thursday in late November, gray sky pressing down on the hillside like a held breath, Junseo Kong was sitting at his kitchen table with a 4-year-old girl's drawing of a tiger taped to the refrigerator, and something in his chest was doing something he could not name and would not have admitted to under torture. The tiger had 6 legs. 3 of them were going in the wrong direction. The tail looked like a question mark. Naomi had given it to him 2 days ago. She'd announced it was him. He'd looked at it for a long time. He hadn't thrown it away. Monica Brooks had come to Seoul 7 years ago, which was 3 years before Naomi was born, and the sequence of events that had brought her from the south side of Chicago to a South Korean Mafia boss's estate was the kind of story that required a different night and a different telling. What mattered now was that she was 32. She was sharp in the particular way that only women who have had to be sharp in order to survive tend to be, and she had been managing the day-to-day operations of the Kang estate for 4 years, which meant she supervised a household staff of 22, managed procurement, handled scheduling for the domestic side of Junseo's life, and served as the human buffer between the cold machinery of his criminal world and the actual functioning of the place where he slept. She was good at it. She was methodical and quiet, and she noticed things. She had learned to notice things very early in life, and that habit had kept her alive through circumstances that would have broken other people. Naomi had been born into this arrangement and had grown up understanding none of it. She was 4. She knew that Mr. Jun was important because everyone walked carefully around him. She knew that her mother worked very hard. She knew that Gerald the giraffe needed to sleep on the left side of the pillow. She knew that the kitchen staff always gave her extra rice if she asked in Korean, which she was getting surprisingly good at. She did not know what the Kang Syndicate was. She did not know what her mother had overheard on 3 separate occasions that had made Monica's hands shake in the privacy of their quarters. She did not know about the conversations Monica had with herself in the mirror at 2 in the morning, weighing the calculus of staying versus leaving, safety versus necessity, and always arriving at the same uneasy place. She was 4. She colored pictures and asked hard questions about insects and fell asleep mid-sentence. She was, in the private estimation of a man who ruled through fear, the least frightening and most disarming person he had ever encountered. The evening of the event began the way those evenings always began, which was to say with tension wearing a very expensive suit. Monica had spent 3 days coordinating the logistics, 42 guests, 6-course dinner, 3 security sweeps of the premises. Catering sourced from a restaurant whose owner owed Junseo a favor significant enough that it would never be called in for anything as small as food. The florist, the sommelier, the parking attendants, all vetted, all instructed, all operating within a carefully maintained fiction that this was simply the home of a very successful businessman entertaining his professional circle. The guest list was a directory of influence. 3 syndicate financiers who moved money through shell companies in Singapore and Luxembourg. 2 members of the National Assembly who had built comfortable careers on the foundation of strategic ignorance. A Japanese logistics executive whose container operations had a particular flexibility when it came to the paperwork. Several investment bankers who asked no questions. A retired general, and among them, arriving in a black dress that cost more than Monica's monthly salary, moving through the room with the ease of someone born to be watched. Yuri Han. Monica watched her from the edge of the room the way she watched most things, quietly, without appearing to watch at all. Yuri Han was 29. She was the daughter of Chairman Han Byung-soo, whose pharmaceutical holdings and media interests represented one of the 4 or 5 largest private fortunes in South Korea. She was educated in Paris and London, spoke 4 languages, and possessed the social intelligence of someone who had been trained from childhood to make powerful people feel seen and important. She was engaged to Junseo. The engagement had been announced 8 months ago. The society coverage had been extensive. She was, by any measure that could be applied from the outside, an extraordinary woman. Monica had learned sometime in the last 6 months not to trust the outside of anything. It had started with small things. The way Yuri's eyes moved differently when she thought no one was watching. A clinical quality. A cataloging. Like a researcher taking inventory rather than a woman in love. The phone calls taken behind closed doors that went on too long. The questions she asked the staff, casual, social, seemingly innocent questions about schedules and routines and the layout of the estate's security infrastructure that Monica had started to write down in a notebook she kept beneath a loose board in her closet. She hadn't gone to Junseo. She had no proof, only a feeling in her gut, and she had lived long enough to know that feelings in your gut don't count in rooms full of men with guns. You needed something harder. She was still building towards something harder. Tonight, however, she was managing canapes and sightlines and making sure the wine was opened at the right temperature, because that was her job, and she had learned years ago that the best cover was just doing your job better than everyone else. The evening moved the way those evenings were designed to move. By 9 o'clock, the deal-making had shifted from the dinner table to the informal clusters in the reception rooms, where men who owned things spoke to other men who owned things in the language of careful implication. Junseo moved through it all with the ease of long practice. The measured smile, the eye contact held exactly long enough, the handshakes that communicated hierarchy without announcing it. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. Yuri stayed close, not too close. She read rooms the way a pilot reads instruments, constantly, systematically, one eye always on the horizon. Monica refilled glasses and kept her face empty and watched. By 11, the guests were beginning to thin. The assembly members left first, as they always did. They had the most to lose from being seen in the wrong context too late at night. The financiers departed in 2s and 3s, the conversations tapering into the particular silence of concluded business. The logistics executive shook hands with 3 people and vanished. By 11:30, the estate was quieting. Monica was in the kitchen overseeing the cleanup, one eye on the clock, when she realized she hadn't seen Naomi in over an hour. She kept the alarm off her face. Naomi sometimes wandered. The estate was large, but it was safe. The staff knew her. The guards knew her. There were a limited number of places she could be. Monica handed off the kitchen oversight to one of the senior staff members and moved quietly through the east wing of the mansion, checking the rooms she knew her daughter gravitated toward. The reading room. Empty. The small garden parlor off the east corridor. Empty. The upstairs hallway, where Naomi sometimes sat on the window bench because she liked to watch the city lights. Empty. Monica's heart was doing something controlled and disciplined and frightened all at once. She kept her footsteps quiet and her face composed and worked her way toward Naomi's room, telling herself the child was probably already asleep, probably already curled around Gerald with her mouth open and her curls going in every direction. She was 3 rooms away from Naomi's door when she heard the voices. They were coming from Junseo's private office at the end of the west corridor. Monica knew that voice. Junseo's. She knew its register, its control. She knew when he was doing business and when he was angry and when he was being careful, and right now the voice was doing something between all three. It was quiet, in the particular way that silence gets before something breaks. She did not know the other voices. There were at least two of them. Men. The kind of low, flat effect that people develop when they have spent years in situations where showing anything is a liability. Monica stopped in the corridor shadow 12 feet from the office door, which was open 2 inches. Just 2 inches. Not enough to see through at this angle. Not enough to be seen. She pressed her back to the wall and kept her breathing slow and told herself she was going to count to 10, and then she was going to backtrack and call security from the ground floor panel, because whatever was happening in that office was not her business, and the smart move was always the cautious one. She counted to 10. She did not move. She listened instead. "Confirmation came through this afternoon," one of the unknown voices was saying. "The accounts have been verified. The files your man pulled from the Busan operation, combined with the land records and the Seoul transaction data, constitute an actionable package." Ministry contact? That was Jun Seo's voice. Tight, controlled. Responsive, conditionally. Defined conditionally. They want the inch and parcel documentation before they commit. The full chain of title. A pause. Then, "I'll have it within the week." Then we have a path forward. Monica's understanding of the conversation was partial and fragmented, but she had worked in this world long enough to know the shape of what she was hearing, even when she couldn't see all the pieces. This was a transaction. It was significant. Junseo was managing it. Then the third voice said something, and Monica's blood went cold. "Miss Han wanted me to confirm the timeline directly. She's concerned about the exposure window before the restructure completes." Silence. Junseo's voice, when it came, was different. Flatter. The control was still there, but it had changed quality, become denser, like something compressing under pressure. "She's aware this channel exists." It was not a question. It was something else entirely. "She established it," the voice said. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Monica's mind was already moving through what she'd just heard, arranging the pieces, feeling them click into a shape she had been half building in her notebook for 6 months. Yuri. A separate channel. A timeline. A restructure. The men in this room. She had not heard them arrive. She had not seen them on the guest list. She had not seen them among the departing guests. They had come in a different way. She needed to move. She turned carefully, slowly, no sudden shifts of weight, and began to ease back along the wall. Her shoulder caught the edge of a narrow side table in the dark. Not hard. A half-inch of contact, but the small decorative item on its surface, a lacquered box probably, she couldn't see it in the dim corridor, shifted and fell. The sound was small. In a quiet house at nearly midnight, it was enormous. Inside the office, the voices stopped. Monica did not run. Running was noise. She pressed flat against the wall and stopped breathing and heard, with awful clarity, the sound of the office door being pulled open the rest of the way. Light from the office fell into the corridor. A man stepped out. He was large in the way that spoke of a life organized around violence, not gym-built, but worn into it, thickened by years of physical reality. He wore a dark jacket and no tie, and his eyes were already adjusted to the dim corridor. He would see her in approximately 2 seconds. Monica pushed off the wall and moved. She didn't make it 3 steps before his hand closed around her arm. She was pulled back toward the office with a force that was entirely casual, which was its own kind of terrifying, the ease of it, the lack of effort. He deposited her through the doorway like something being carried in from outside, and Monica caught herself on the edge of the desk and turned to face the room. 3 men. None of them the house staff, none of them people she had ever seen. Junseo stood at the far end of his desk. His face was doing nothing, absolutely nothing. But his eyes found hers for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction she saw something she had never seen there before. Not fear, because Junseo Kang did not permit himself fear, but something adjacent to it, a calculation happening at speed, and the calculation not resolving cleanly. "Who is she?" The voice came from the man nearest the window, shorter than the one who'd grabbed her, but with a stillness that was more frightening. He had the kind of face that had decided most things a long time ago, and did not revisit the decisions. "Household staff," the large man said. "Management," Monica said. Her voice came out level. She had not planned that. Some animal part of her had decided that level was the correct register and had gone there without consultation. I managed the domestic operations of this estate. What did you hear? I heard voices and was coming to check if something was needed. She held the man's gaze and willed her pulse to behave. I manage this house. I come when there are sounds I don't recognize. How long were you in the corridor? I just arrived. The man looked at her with the flat attention of someone deciding the weight of an object. He looked at Jun-seo. Something passed between them that Monica could not decode. There's a problem, the large man said from behind her. There's a solution, the shorter one said. And Monica understood from the tone and the angle of his attention that the solution he was describing was not a good one for her. Jun-seo said, no. His voice was still flat, still controlled, but there was a weight in that single syllable that shifted the room's temperature. She works for me. She stays intact. She was in the corridor. She works for me, he said again. That's the end of that discussion. The room was a held breath. Monica did not look away from the shorter man because looking away felt like losing something critical, and she could feel the shape of the situation, the way it could collapse in any direction, the way her continued presence here was a variable that had not been accounted for in whatever arrangement these men had made. She was standing in the middle of something she did not have the full shape of, and the thing she understood best was that information was the only currency she had. She was turning that over in her mind, measuring it, when she heard the footsteps. Small ones, padded, soft, coming from the direction of the east corridor, the sound of a child who woke up in the middle of the night and has not yet learned to be quiet about it. Monica's entire body went electric. Naomi appeared in the doorway of the office the way 4-year-olds always appeared, completely, without preamble or caution, as though the concept of a room that might be dangerous was not yet installed in her. She was wearing the yellow star pajamas Monica had put her in at 7:30. She was carrying Gerald by one ear. Her curls were compressed on one side from sleep and voluminous on the other. She looked at the room with the open, uncomplicated assessment of a child who sees things without the filter of knowing what they should mean. Her eyes moved across the strange men, across Jun-seo, and then they found Monica, and they found the large man's hand, which was still close to Monica's arm, and something in Naomi's face shifted from sleepy confusion into something harder. Harder was not a word that fit 4-year-olds easily, but there it was. Naomi, Monica said. Her voice was still level. It required everything she had. Baby, go back to your room. Naomi did not go back to her room. She looked at the large man. She looked at the way he was positioned relative to Monica. She processed this with the peculiar directness of a child who has not yet learned to doubt what her eyes are telling her. She walked into the room. The large man, Tae-hyun Cho, though Monica did not know his name yet, watched the child approach with an expression that had not changed. He was 6'3". He weighed 260 pounds. He had done things in his life that put him beyond the reach of normal categories of judgment. He was watching a 4-year-old girl walk toward him, and he had not moved, which meant, on some level, he had not processed this as a thing that required a response. Naomi stopped directly between him and Monica. She crossed her arms. She looked up at him, and in a voice that was entirely, completely serious, the voice of someone who has decided something and is communicating the decision, not negotiating it, she said, "Let him go or deal with me." The room went silent, not the silence of a pause, the silence of something structural giving way. Tae-hyun looked down at the child. And Monica watched his face, and Monica saw something happen there that she had no framework for. Something that broke open slowly, like a fault line that had been building pressure for years and had just found the exact crack it needed. He had a daughter. Monica did not know this then. She would learn it later. A daughter he had not seen in 3 years. A daughter who would be roughly Naomi's age. A daughter who had her own stuffed animal that she carried by one ear, and who had dark curls even though her mother was Korean, and the curls were a mystery the family had never solved. And who looked at Tae-hyun the same way Naomi was looking at him now, with the specific, undiluted courage of a child who does not yet know there are things she should be afraid of. He stood there. The shorter man made a sound, not words, just a signal, a prompt. Tae-hyun didn't respond to it. He kept looking at Naomi. Naomi kept looking at him. Her arms were still crossed. Her chin was up. Gerald the giraffe dangled. And then Tae Hyun Cho, who had in his career as a Kwan Syndicate enforcer put 11 people in the ground and never lost a night of sleep over any of them, took his hand back from Monica's vicinity and took one step backward and turned his face away. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was the movement of a man who has made a decision so quietly that it barely registered as movement at all. He just stopped being part of what was happening. The shorter man's stillness changed quality. It became something sharper. Jun-seo, behind his desk, saw the shift in the room's structure, and in the same moment that the shorter man moved, hand going somewhere inside his jacket, Jun-seo's hand went beneath the desk. Monica grabbed Naomi and dropped. The alarm was silent. It went to 6 phones and a central dispatch board simultaneously, and the response time was 4 minutes and 30 seconds, which Jun-seo's head of security would later say was unacceptable, and which Jun-seo would say, very quietly, was sufficient. What happened in the office in those 4 minutes and 30 seconds was violent and close quarters, and not something that Naomi saw, because Monica had her pressed face first into her shoulder in the corner behind the leather settee, Monica's body between her daughter and the room. And Naomi was... This was the thing Monica would replay for years, not crying. She was gripping Gerald with both arms, and her face was in Monica's neck, and she was breathing fast, but she was not crying. Monica could hear everything. She could hear Jun-seo and what that sounded like when the controlled exterior was stripped away by necessity. The sound of a man who was also underneath the empire and the fear he'd constructed around himself, a body moving through space trying not to die. She heard something break. She heard an impact. She heard a short, unfinished shout. She stayed down. She held Naomi. She had learned in a life that had required her to learn it, the difference between the moments when you move and the moments when you wait. And this was a waiting moment, and she held that knowledge in her chest like a stone and breathed around it. The security team came through the estate's side entrance first, which was procedure, and they cleared the ground floor in 90 seconds and reached the office corridor 2 minutes after that. Monica heard the team leader identify himself. She heard the particular stillness that followed armed professionals entering a room where armed violence has already occurred. She heard Jun-seo's voice, still controlled, slightly rough, not asking for help, reporting a situation the way a general reports from a front line. 2 subjects in custody, 1 unaccounted, run the perimeter. And then, after a pause, in a completely different register, Monica. She stood up. She lifted Naomi with her. She came around the settee. The office was not something she could fully take in right then. She filed it away for later and looked at Jun-seo instead. He was standing. There was a cut above his eye that was bleeding freely down the side of his face in the way head wounds do. Dramatically, but without necessarily meaning what it looked like. He was holding his left arm at a slightly wrong angle. His face was doing the thing it always did, the absolute control. But it was doing it harder now, with more effort visible underneath. He looked at Naomi. Something happened in his face that he immediately reassembled, but Monica saw it. Naomi looked at him for a moment, assessing. Then she said with the irreducible confidence of a 4-year-old arriving at a conclusion, "Mr. June, you got a boo-boo." He looked at her. He said, "Yes. I have bluey band-aids." He looked at her for another long moment. "I'll keep that in mind." Monica exhaled for what felt like the first time in 20 minutes. But the night was not over. The security team's perimeter sweep came back 30 minutes later, and the head of security came directly to Jun-seo with a face that meant bad news was arriving in formal clothing. The unaccounted man had not left the estate. His phone, pulled from the unconscious man now in custody, had 3 contacts. 2 of them were unfamiliar. The third was a number that Jun-seo recognized, not from his own contacts, but from the briefing files he had reviewed 3 months ago about a competitor's financial infrastructure. It was a number connected to the Kwan Syndicate. Min Jae Kwan. Jun-seo looked at the number for a long time. Then he looked at the security team leader and said, in the same flat, controlled voice, "Find the financial records for the estate for the last 18 months. Everything relating to Miss Han's access permissions. Pull it all and bring it to me." The team leader left. Jun-seo stood alone in what remained of his office. Broken glass, displaced furniture, the copper smell of blood already cooling in the air conditioning, and he did something he almost never did. He stood still and let himself feel the shape of what had just happened. Yuri. He had brought her into his life 8 months ago. He had built a future in his mind that included her. He had, and this was the part that would take him the longest to process, not tonight, but in the weeks that followed, trusted her. Not completely, because complete trust was a thing he had decided long ago was not available to someone in his position. But more than he had trusted anyone in years, more than was, apparently, warranted. The financial records would come back. He already knew what they would say. He could feel the shape of it, the length and architecture of a betrayal that had not happened overnight, that had been planned and built and executed with patience and precision. He had thought he was the most patient person in any room he was ever in. He had been wrong. The sound of small footsteps in the corridor outside the office made him look up. Monica appeared in the doorway, and she was holding Naomi's hand, and Naomi was carrying something, a small first aid kit decorated with cartoon characters, which Monica had clearly retrieved from their quarters at her daughter's insistence. Naomi was looking at the cut above his eye with the focused attention of a child undertaking a serious project. "I brought the bluey ones," she said, "and Mama says you have to sit down first." Monica met his eyes over Naomi's head. Her expression was complicated. The particular complexity of a woman who has survived something and has not yet had time to process it, and is operating on the other side of adrenaline in the specific clarity that sometimes follows. She said, "She's not going to drop it." Junseo looked at the child. He looked at the first aid kit. He looked at the state of his office and what it represented. The collapse of something he had been building for 8 months, the unmasking of a threat that had lived inside his home, the beginning of a war that was going to be wide and costly and would have to be managed with care. He sat down. Naomi approached with the kit open and began the very serious work of selecting the right Band-Aid. And Junseo Kang, who had survived 11 years of running an empire by never letting anything get close, sat very still while a 4-year-old girl pressed a cartoon character bandage above his eye and patted it 3 times to make it stick. Outside, the security team was running the perimeter. Somewhere in Seoul, a woman named Yuri Han was in a car heading toward whatever next step she had planned. Somewhere in the same city, Min Jae-kwon was waiting for a call that was not going to come. And in the Kang estate, in an office full of broken glass and the aftermath of violence, a little girl in yellow star pajamas was telling a mafia boss that he needed to be more careful. The night was not over. The war hadn't even started yet. The financial records came back at 2:47 in the morning. Junseo had not slept. He had not expected to. He sat behind his desk, the same desk, the glass swept away now, the broken lamp replaced with a work light someone had sourced from the utility room, and he went through the documents the way he went through everything, methodically, without expression, page by page, letting the picture assemble itself rather than trying to force it. It took him 40 minutes to reach the conclusion he had already known he was going to reach. Yuri Han had been inside his financial infrastructure for 14 months. Not deeply, not clumsily. She hadn't needed to go deep or be clumsy because the access she'd cultivated was architectural. She had positioned herself at the junctions where information flowed, not the endpoints where it could be caught and traced. Conversations overheard, documents left accessible, passwords observed, not stolen. A photograph of a whiteboard taken on a phone during what appeared, from the metadata, to be a moment when she was alone in the estate's secondary conference room for 8 minutes while Junseo took a call in the adjacent hall. 8 minutes. 14 months of patience, and the actual damage had been done 8 minutes at a time. He sat with that for a while. His head of security, Park Sung-jin, 44, 16 years with the syndicate, the closest thing Junseo had to someone he called when things went wrong, rather than when things needed to go right, stood at the edge of the desk with the look of a man who had delivered bad news before and had learned that the worst part was the silence between the delivery and the response. Junseo set the last page down. "How much did they get?" Sung-jin inhaled. "The Busan Land Portfolio Documentation, the Incheon Transaction Ledger from 2021 through early this year, the financial architecture of the Singapore holding structure, not the operating accounts, but the ownership chain. The ministry contacts? Unknown, possibly. The conference room access log shows 3 instances of her being alone in that space during periods when the relevant files were on the board." Junseo was quiet. The work light threw a hard shadow across his face, and the cartoon bandage above his eye looked wrong in that light, small and bright against everything else. "The men from tonight," he said. 2 in custody, 1 still unlocated. The two in custody are Quan Syndicate Peripheral, hired for this specific operation, limited access to the overall structure. They were given the estate layout, the event schedule, and a target package. What was the target? Sung Jin paused. The hard drive from the secondary safe in this office, he said. And you. Jun-seo looked at him. You were the secondary objective, Sung Jin said. The drive was primary. You were... The phrase used in the communications we've recovered is discretionary. Meaning if removing you was clean and low risk, they were authorized to do it. If it complicated the primary objective, they were to leave it. Jun-seo was quiet for a moment. He looked at the safe, which was built into the wall behind a panel, in which the intruders had not reached. Yuri knew about the secondary safe. She was in this office on 6 documented occasions. The safe isn't hidden from someone who knows to look. Does she know what's on the drive? The drive contains the evidentiary package for the Incheon municipal corruption case, the one we've been building against Councilman Bae for the last 18 months. Sung Jin's voice was careful, neutral. If that package reaches the Quan Syndicate before we move on Bae, they have leverage over him. He flips. And Bae has 18 months of our operational communications in his personal archive because we used him as an unwitting conduit. The weight of that settled into the room. Jun-seo stood up. He walked to the window. The Seoul skyline was doing what it always did at 3 a.m, glittering, indifferent, going about its business. He looked at it without seeing it. Where is she now? He said. Her phone went dark 40 minutes after the event ended. Last ping was the Han family's secondary property in Seongbuk-dong. Sung Jin paused. She may have been warned. If the unaccounted man got out and made contact... He got out, Jun-seo said. Not a question. Sung Jin said nothing, which was its own answer. Then she knows the operation failed. Jun-seo turned from the window. His face had settled into something that was past anger. Anger was a temperature, and he was past temperature now, into something colder and more functional. And she knows we're looking at the records. And she knows the clock has changed. Yes. Then we move before morning. He looked at Sung Jin. Pull the Seongbuk-dong property up. I want 2 teams. I want them there inside 90 minutes, and I want Yuri Han brought here intact. Not harmed. Intact. Sung Jin nodded. He moved toward the door. Sung Jin. He stopped. The man who walked out tonight, Jun-seo said. The large one. Tae-hyun Cho. He had gotten the name from the custody files an hour ago. What do we have on him? Sung Jin turned back, something shifting slightly in his expression. He was Kwan's primary enforcement for the Northern Territory operations. Been with the syndicate 8 years. Before that, construction and private security. A pause. He has a daughter, 6 years old. Mother has full custody, somewhere in Busan. He's been sending money but no contact for 3 years. Voluntary separation, not court-ordered. The file doesn't explain it, but the implication is he kept his distance from the family deliberately. Bam! Jun-seo looked at the desk for a moment. When we locate him, he said, I want to know before any action is taken. Bring it to me first. Sung Jin left. Jun-seo stood alone in the office for the first time since the night had collapsed into what it had become. He stood and looked at the safe and thought about 14 months and 8 minutes and the particular quality of patience required to dismantle something from the inside without the person being dismantled ever feeling the pressure change. He had respected that quality when he encountered it in his competitors. Finding it in his home was a different category of thing entirely. Who? Monica did not sleep. She sat in the chair by the window in their quarters with her feet tucked under her and Naomi asleep in the bed. Finally, deeply asleep, Gerald crushed under one arm, the yellow star pajamas twisted from the restlessness of a child who had been overtired and overstimulated and had fought sleep for an hour before crashing completely. And Monica sat with her notebook open on her knee and worked through what she knew. She had been building the Yuri file for 6 months. Notes on patterns, times and dates, inconsistencies between what Yuri said and what Monica observed. The notebook was not conclusive. It had never been conclusive, which was why she had never brought it forward. It was circumstantial and observational, and she had known it would not be enough for a man like Jun-seo Kang, who operated in a world where the standard of proof for betrayal was necessarily high because the consequences of a false accusation were catastrophic. She looked at her notes now and felt the specific bitterness of having been right too early to do anything about it. She had known. Not everything. She hadn't known about the Quan Syndicate connection, hadn't known the scope of the infiltration, but she had known something was wrong, and she had spent 6 months building a case that was still circumstantial when the situation had resolved itself the hard way. She closed the notebook. Then she opened it again and wrote down everything she remembered about tonight. Times, words, details, because she had learned that memory is unreliable under stress, and the right information at the wrong moment is no information at all. She wrote for 40 minutes. Then she sat and looked at Naomi and felt, in the silence of 3:30 in the morning, the full weight of what her daughter had done. The child had no framework for what she had walked into. She had seen a large man close to her mother, and she had responded with everything she had, which was precisely nothing useful in any conventional sense. No size, no weapon, no threat she could actually make good on. And she had done it anyway, without hesitation, without calculation, just walked into the center of something dangerous and planted herself there as though the force of her intention were sufficient. Monica's throat did something she didn't have words for. She looked at her daughter sleeping and felt the fear she had not allowed herself to feel in the office. Real fear, delayed by adrenaline, arriving now in full with the retroactive knowledge of how badly that moment could have ended. Then she felt something else. Something she also didn't have a clean word for, that existed in the space between terror and pride. She went back to the notebook. The Seongbuk Dong operation came back empty at 4:15. The house had been vacated. Professional. Nothing left behind that was useful. Every obvious trace removed. The kind of exit that suggested either advanced planning or very fast execution by someone who knew how to leave cleanly. Sungjin brought the news to Junseo in person. Junseo took it without visible reaction. She had a contingency. Multiple, probably. The property was rented through a third-party management company. We're working back through the ownership structure, but it's layered. She had 14 months to prepare, Junseo said. She had time to build layers. He moved to the desk and sat. He was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that lives in the structural tissue of a person, in the place behind the eyes where the things you believed about your own judgment are stored. He would not have called it what it was. He would have called it a logistical problem requiring a solution. I need to reach Min Jae-kwan, he said. Sungjin went still. Directly. Arrange it. That's... Sungjin stopped. In 16 years, he had disagreed with Junseo on perhaps 4 occasions, each time briefly and each time ultimately deferring to the authority in the room. He was measuring whether this was a 5th occasion. That's a significant exposure. A direct communication can be used as, I'm aware of what it can be used as. Arrange it. Sungjin left again. Junseo put his hands flat on the desk and looked at them. The left arm was strapped now, a deep bruise and what felt like a cracked rib below it, from the close quarters exchange that had happened when the shorter man had come across the desk. The estate's doctor had been woken and had assessed and had recommended rest and imaging, neither of which Junseo had any intention of pursuing before morning. He thought about Yuri. He thought about the specific memory, dinner 6 weeks ago in the private dining room. She had poured his wine and they had talked about the engagement timeline, and she had looked at him the way she always looked at him, with that specific warm attention that he had felt, on some level he did not acknowledge readily, was unusual for him to receive. He was not a man people looked at warmly. He was a man people looked at carefully. She had looked at him warmly. He had let himself believe it. He did not make that kind of mistake. He had not made that kind of mistake in 20 years of building and defending an empire. He had made it. The thought sat in him like a piece of glass, small and sharp, and doing its work quietly. But Sungjin came back at 5:40 with a different face, not the careful neutrality he maintained when delivering bad news. Something else. A tighter quality, slightly pale at the edges in the way of a man who has received information that does not fit his existing categories. Junseo saw it immediately. What? We located Taehyun Cho. Where? He walked into the 4th District Police Station in Central Seoul at 4:58 this morning. Sungjin set a printed document on the desk. He surrendered voluntarily. He's been in interview with the Organized Crime Unit for the last 40 minutes. He asked for a specific detective, Choi Woo-sung, the investigator who's been building the Quan Syndicate case for the last 3 years. A pause. He's talking. Jonseo looked at the document. It was a preliminary notification, the kind that moved through channels when someone significant made contact with law enforcement, flagged by the syndicate's contacts inside the department. He's giving them the Quan structure, Junseo said. Everything we can determine from the preliminary intercepts. The financial infrastructure, the operation hierarchy, the Seoul network map. Sungjin's voice was precise and careful, including tonight's operation, including its origin point. Junseo looked up. Yuri, by name, with documentation he claims to have retained from his operational briefings. Sungjin met his eyes. If what he has is what he says he has, the evidentiary case against the Quan Syndicate goes from circumstantial to prosecutable in approximately one conversation. The room was quiet. Junseo thought about a child in yellow star pajamas crossing her arms in a dark corridor. He thought about a 6'3" enforcer who had killed 11 people looking down at her and then taking one step back. He thought about a man who had chosen, at 4:58 in the morning, to walk into a police station and tell the truth about his life. He did not say any of this. He said, "What does he want in return?" He hasn't made formal demands, but the detective who took his surrender made an informal note. Sungjin looked at the document. He asked that whatever deal is arranged include confirmation that his daughter won't be used as leverage by the Quan Syndicate during proceedings. Junseo was quiet for a moment. He's afraid they'll go after her, he said. She's 6. She's in Busan with her mother. The Quan Syndicate has a history of... I know their history. Junseo stood. I want 2 people in Busan by this afternoon, quietly. The mother doesn't need to know they're there. Just make sure nothing reaches that child. Sungjin looked at him. It's not sentiment, Junseo said, and the edge in his voice closed the subject. It's operational. If Cho's testimony is what it sounds like, his cooperation is the most valuable thing that's happened tonight. Protecting what he needs protected keeps him cooperative. That's the calculation. Sungjin nodded. Now, Min-jae Kwan, has the channel been established? It's being arranged. We'll have a secure line within the hour. Junseo nodded. He moved toward the window again. The sky was beginning to do what it did before dawn, that particular shift from black to the gray that didn't feel like light yet, just the absence of complete dark. Seoul was still glittering, less aggressively now, the way a city looks when the night has been going on long enough that even the lights seem tired. There's something else, Sungjin said. His voice had changed again. A different register. The one he used when the information was personal. Junseo turned. Monica Brooks, Sungjin said. We ran her standard background update when we pulled the staff files tonight. Procedure. He set a second document on the desk. There's a record we didn't have before. It came through the Interpol cross-reference. Junseo looked at the document without picking it up. She has a prior contact with law enforcement in Chicago, Sungjin said. 7 years ago. Before she came to Seoul. She was a material witness in a federal organized crime investigation. A pause. She provided testimony. The investigation closed with convictions. The room was very still. She testified against an organized crime operation, Junseo said. Yes. And then she left Chicago and came to Seoul. Yes. And applied for a position in this household. Yes. Sungjin let that sit. He was good at letting things sit without filling the silence. It was one of the things Junseo valued about him. Junseo picked up the document. He read it. He read it again. He set it down. He looked at the window. He thought about 7 years. He thought about a woman who managed his household with precise, quiet competence and noticed things other people missed and kept her face neutral and had been building, apparently, a notebook full of observations about Yuri Han that she had never brought forward. A woman who had once testified against people like him. A woman whose child had just stepped between his enemies and his life. Pull everything, he said. His voice was flat and even. Full audit of her access, her communications, any cross-references with external contacts. I want it on this desk before noon. And in the meantime? Junseo said nothing for a long moment. Then, in the meantime, nothing changes. She doesn't know we have this. She goes about her morning. The child... Something moved briefly in his expression and was gone. The child is not to be made uncomfortable. Whatever this is, the child has no part in it. Sungjin nodded and left. Junseo stood alone and held the document and thought about all the ways a person could be precisely what they appeared to be and also something else entirely. He was still thinking about it when his phone rang with the secure channel to Min-jae Kwan. He picked it up. You sent men into my house, he said, without greeting. The voice on the other end was calm and unhurried, the voice of a man who had been expecting this call. I sent men to retrieve property that originated in my organization. Your property nearly put a child in the floor. A pause. Brief. Calibrated. That was not the intention. Intentions and outcomes are different things, Junseo said. You know that better than most. I do, Kwon said, which is why I'll be direct. The woman is gone. The operation failed. The documentation you're concerned about is still in your possession. From my perspective, we've reached a natural reset point. The question is whether you want to escalate from here or Yuri Han. Silence. She's under my protection, Kwon said. She was inside my home for 14 months. She was doing what she was asked to do, skillfully. A pause. You might have done the same thing in my position. I wouldn't have brought a child into it. The silence this time was longer. Nobody brought the child into it, Kwon said, and for the first time there was something in his voice that was not entirely managed. That was outside the parameters of the operation. She was in the corridor, Junseo said, because she lives in my house, which your people entered, so she was always going to be a possible variable. You didn't plan for that because you didn't think about it, and you didn't think about it because she's small and irrelevant to your calculations. His voice was still even, still controlled, but it had a density now that compressed the air in the room. That's the difference between your operation and mine. I account for the variables I bring into proximity. Kwon said nothing. Return Yuri Han by 6 this morning, Junseo said. Voluntarily, with whatever documentation she retained from my estate. That's the only version of this conversation in which the next 24 hours go quietly. And if I don't find that arrangement acceptable, Junseo thought about Tae-hyun Cho sitting in an interview room in the 4th District Police Station, dismantling the Kwon syndicate from the inside with the methodical grief of a man who had found the exact moment when he could no longer continue. Then by this afternoon, he said, you won't be making arrangements at all. He ended the call. He set the phone down on the desk. He sat. And that was when Monica knocked on the open office door, and he turned, and she was standing in the doorway with her notebook held against her chest, and her face doing the thing it always did, the careful neutrality, the watching. But her eyes were doing something different, something that had made a decision. I have something you need to see, she said. He looked at her. He thought about the document Sung Jin had left on the desk, face down now, 3 feet from his left hand. Sit down, he said. She sat. She opened the notebook, and whatever was about to happen between the two of them, the confrontation, the accounting, the question of which of them had been keeping what from whom and why, had just become inevitable. There was no version of the next conversation in which either of them could still pretend they were only what they appeared to be. The point of no return had a sound. It sounded like a notebook opening on a desk at 5:47 in the morning, in a room that still smelled like the night's violence, while a little girl slept down the hall in yellow star pajamas with a giraffe under her arm and no idea at all what the adults in her life were about to discover about each other. The notebook had 41 pages of notes. Junseo read them without speaking. Monica sat across the desk and watched him read and kept her hands still in her lap and her face composed and breathed through the specific quality of silence that exists between two people who are both holding things they haven't said yet, measuring the room, deciding. He read slowly. He turned each page with the same deliberate care he brought to financial documents, not rushing, not skimming, letting the information accumulate into a shape before drawing conclusions from it. Monica had organized the notes chronologically, which meant the picture built gradually. Small observations in the early months, growing density through the spring, the entries from the last 6 weeks increasingly specific and alarmed. He reached the final page. He set the notebook down. He looked at her. 6 months, he said. Yes. You've had this for 6 months. I've been building it for 6 months. There's a difference. Her voice was even. She had rehearsed this moment. Not the words, but the register. The level, factual tone that communicated she was not apologizing and was not afraid, even though one of those things was partially untrue. What I had 3 months ago wasn't sufficient to bring forward. Observations aren't proof. Patterns aren't evidence. In a household like this one, bringing an accusation against someone at her level without something harder than a feeling in my gut. She paused. You know what happens to people who make accusations they can't support. He was quiet. I needed something harder, she said. I was working toward it. And tonight gave you something harder. Tonight gave everyone something harder. He looked at the notebook again without picking it up. He looked at the date on the first entry, May, 7 months ago. He looked at the entry for the evening 3 weeks before the engagement announcement, where Monica had written in her precise, tight handwriting, YH accessed secondary conference room alone 11:40 to 11:48 p.m. No stated reason. Files from Busan portfolio review still on board from earlier meeting. Staff log shows board was not cleared until morning. 8 minutes. He had just been told about those 8 minutes by Sung Jin. He was now looking at Monica's handwritten note about them from 3 weeks before the engagement was announced. She had known before the engagement. She had said nothing. He picked the notebook back up and turned to that entry and looked at it, and then looked at her. This is from October, he said. Yes. The engagement was announced in November. Yes. The silence was different now, denser. You watched me announce an engagement to a woman you had documented concerns about, he said, and you said nothing. Monica held his gaze. I had documented observations, not proof. And you had just announced an engagement to the daughter of Han Byung-soo, which meant that bringing those observations forward required me to be able to defend them against the full weight of one of the 4 largest private fortunes in South Korea, the legal resources that come with it, and the assumption that a household manager with a foreign passport was, what? Jealous, confused, overstepping. She let that sit for exactly long enough. I needed something harder. Junseo set the notebook down again. He looked at his hands. You were protecting yourself, he said. I was protecting my daughter, she said, and the evenness in her voice finally carried something underneath it. Not anger, but the compressed weight of a truth she had been carrying alone for 7 months. I have a 4-year-old child in this house. I have no family in Seoul. My legal status in this country is contingent on my employment here. If I made an accusation I couldn't support, and it went badly, and it would have gone badly without harder evidence, I lose my position. I lose my housing, I potentially lose my visa, and my daughter loses everything. She stopped. She started again, more quietly. I am not a person with a lot of room for mistakes. I needed to be sure. The room was quiet. Junseo looked at her for a long time. The kind of look that doesn't perform anything, doesn't signal warmth or coldness, just sees. Monica had been on the receiving end of that look before, when she'd first been interviewed for the position 4 years ago, and it had the same quality now that it had then, the sensation of being read rather than observed. There's something else, he said. She knew what was coming. She had calculated the probability that the records check had already been run as somewhere between certain and inevitable. She had decided, on the walk from her quarters to this office, that the only move available to her was to be ahead of it. The federal case in Chicago, she said. Yes. He looked at her. I was 24, she said. I was working as an office manager for a distribution company that turned out to be a front for a narcotics operation. I didn't know that when I took the job. When I found out what was moving through those books, I had 2 choices. She paused. I made one of them. I testified. The investigation closed. I moved to Seoul 6 months later because staying in Chicago wasn't a viable option anymore. You testified against an organized crime operation, he said, and then came to work in one. I came to work in a household, managing staff and schedules and procurement. Her voice was still level. I am aware of the nature of the organization this household belongs to. I have been aware of it for 4 years. I have done my job. I have not communicated anything about this household to any external party. I have not maintained any contact with law enforcement since leaving the United States. If your records check was thorough, it was thorough. Then you know that. He was quiet again. The work light between them threw hard shadows, and the cartoon bandage on his forehead had begun to peel at one corner, and the dawn light was now properly present in the window behind him, gray and flat, and without warmth. He said, Why should I believe you? She said, You shouldn't, not on the basis of what I've just told you. You should verify it. She reached into the back of the notebook and produced 3 folded pages, printouts, the kind that had been waiting for exactly this conversation. These are the closed case records. These are my communication logs from the past 4 years. I've been keeping them, everything external, because I knew the day I took this job that if this conversation ever happened, I would need them. And this, the third page, is a sworn statement I prepared 8 weeks ago with a private notary in Itaewon, documenting everything in this notebook and attesting that I had not and would not share it with any external party without first making it available to the estate. She set the 3 pages on the desk. She sat back. I have a daughter, she said. I have been building a life. I do not have the luxury of playing both sides. Junseo looked at the pages. He did not pick them up yet. 8 weeks ago, he said. You prepared a notarized statement 8 weeks ago. Yes. That was 3 weeks after the Busan conference room incident. Yes. He looked at her. Something shifted in his face, not softness, not warmth, but a recalibration. The look of a man adjusting his model of a situation. He picked up the 3 pages. He read them. He set them down. I'll have these verified, he said. I'd expect nothing less. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your daughter. Monica went very still. What she did last night, he said, she wasn't afraid. She doesn't know enough to be afraid of the right things yet. Monica's voice had changed. Still careful, but something warmer at the edges. She thought someone was hurting her mother. That was the whole picture for her. She stopped him. She did. A 4-year-old stopped Taehyun Cho. A 4-year-old reminded him of something he'd been trying to forget, Monica said. That's different. But yes, Junseo was quiet for a long time. He looked at the window. He looked at the desk. He looked at the notebook and the pages and the first faint evidence of daylight doing its grim work on the Seoul skyline. Then his phone rang. It was Sung Jin. His voice had a quality that Junseo had heard perhaps twice in 16 years. A clipped, pressurized quality that meant the structure of the situation had changed faster than anticipated. We have a problem, Sung Jin said. Tell me. The Kwan Syndicate made contact with the ministry. Not our ministry contact. A separate channel, one we didn't have mapped. The contact is Assemblyman Park Dae-won. Junseo went still. Park is Kwan's. Apparently. We didn't have him flagged. He's been careful. Sung Jin paused. He moved 40 minutes ago, filed an emergency application with the Financial Intelligence Unit citing suspected money laundering in the Kang corporate structure. The application references documents, specific documents, the Incheon transaction ledger, the Singapore ownership chain. The documentation Yuri passed them, yes, but there's more. Sung Jin's voice dropped further. The application includes a secondary filing, a witness declaration. From who? Silence. From Monica Brooks, Sung Jin said, dated 14 months ago. The room stopped. Junseo looked at Monica. She was looking back at him, and whatever she saw in his face made her own go carefully blank again. The neutrality snapping back into place with the speed of someone who has learned to control their reactions under pressure. Read it to me, Junseo said. Sung Jin read the summary. It was 3 paragraphs. It described the operational structure of the Kang Estate's household management, the access points it provided, the movement of personnel and documentation, and the observation of 3 specific financial transactions. It was signed Monica Brooks. It was dated 14 months ago. The signature had been notarized. When Sung Jin finished, the silence lasted a full 10 seconds. Get Cho's police interview, Junseo said. His voice was mechanical now, stripped of everything except function. I want everything he's said so far, and I want our legal infrastructure briefed within the hour. Do not let Sung-ho move any accounts until I authorize it personally. He paused. Lock the estate. He ended the call. He set the phone on the desk. He looked at Monica. She was looking at him with an expression that had gone from controlled to something that was trying very hard to remain controlled and not entirely succeeding. Her eyes moving slightly, making small, rapid calculations, reading the change in him. What? She said. What just happened? A witness declaration, he said. Filed with the Financial Intelligence Unit, signed by you, dated 14 months ago. The color left her face. Not gradually. All at once, the way color leaves a face when something hits the body's deepest alarm system. A sudden, complete draining that happens below the level of performance. That's not possible, she said. It's filed. That is not possible. She leaned forward, both hands flat on the desk. her voice low and fast and stripped of the careful register she'd been maintaining. I have never made a declaration to any law enforcement or regulatory body in this country. I have never communicated with the Financial Intelligence Unit. I have no contact with any Korean government entity. I told you I kept communication logs you can verify. A document exists with your name and your notarized signature, he said, dated 14 months ago, filed this morning by a Kwan Syndicate asset inside the National Assembly. She was silent. She was staring at him, and then he watched her work through it, watched her face go through the stages of that processing, the way a person's face moves through information that is rearranging the structure of what they understand, and he saw the moment she arrived at the answer. Yuri, she said. She said it very quietly. 14 months, she said. Yuri has been inside this house for 14 months. She had access to my employment documentation, my notarized professional certifications, my signature on estate management contracts. She stopped. She had something with my notarized signature, and she used it. She built a document around it. Jun-seo looked at her. I can prove that, Monica said. The dates don't line up. I wasn't in the country 14 months ago. I was in Japan with Naomi for her medical follow-up. There are entry and exit records. There are hospital records. I can prove I was not in Seoul on the date of that notarization. That takes time, he said. How much time do we have? He looked at her. How much time, she said again, and her voice was not asking about the legal situation. The estate is being locked, he said. Until this is resolved, your movement is going to be restricted. Monica sat back. She looked at the desk. She looked at her hands. She looked at the notebook she had brought, the pages she had prepared, the 8 weeks of careful documentation she had carried into this room as her only leverage, and she understood, with the specific clarity of someone watching a trap close, that none of it was going to matter fast enough. My daughter is in this building, she said. She's safe. That's not the same as free. No, he said. It's not. The silence between them was a different kind now. Not confrontational, not the silence of two people sizing each other up. The silence of two people who have just discovered they are standing in the same wreckage for different reasons. Monica's jaw tightened. She looked at the window. The morning light was real now, pale and indifferent. She built this as a contingency, Monica said, thinking aloud, not really talking to him. If the operation failed, but if Taehyun walked away, if the drive wasn't retrieved, if Kwan's men were caught, she had a fallback. She had a prepared document that puts me in the center of this. That makes me a liability to you. That forces your hand before you can verify anything. She stopped. She needed you to have a reason not to trust me, because I'm the one who documented her. Jun-seo said nothing. She knew about the notebook, Monica said, or she suspected I was watching her, and she prepared for it. Monica's voice had a quality now that was almost not admiring, not that, but a dark acknowledgement of the precision of it. 14 months. She built the whole operation, and she built the cleanup for the operation at the same time. Yes, Jun-seo said. Monica looked at him. You believe me. He was quiet for a moment. I believe the declaration is forged, he said carefully. The dates you mentioned, the Japan trip, that's verifiable within hours. The signature can be analyzed. He paused. What I believe and what I can demonstrate quickly are different things, and right now quickly is the only currency that matters. Because Kwan is moving. Because Kwan is moving, and he has a government asset filing paperwork, and Taehyun Cho is in a police interview giving testimony that is simultaneously our best weapon and a lit match next to everything we've built, and Yuri Han is somewhere in this city with documentation from my estate and a head start of several hours. He looked at the desk. And you are currently, on paper, a cooperating witness against this organization, which means until that's disproved, I cannot give you access to anything that would allow you to move against me if the paper were real. And my daughter, Monica said, stays safe. That's not conditional. It needs to be more than not conditional, she said, and her voice finally broke from the level register. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a single crack in the surface that revealed the depth of the thing underneath. She is 4 years old, and she is in this building, and if this situation goes the wrong direction, she has nowhere. She stopped. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. She pulled the register back, deliberately, like closing a window. I need your word that whatever happens between you and me, she is not used as leverage, not held, not threatened, not made into a variable. Jun-seo looked at her for a long time. He thought about a child in yellow star pajamas. He thought about what it meant that she had walked into the center of something she had no framework for and planted herself there anyway. "She won't be touched," he said. "Your word." "My word." Monica looked at him for 3 full seconds, making her own calculation, arriving at the only available conclusion. "Then tell me what you need," she said. "Because I know things about Yuri Han's movements in this house that aren't in that notebook. Things I observed and didn't write down because I didn't think they'd matter. And right now I think they might be the only thread you have left that leads somewhere useful." Outside, somewhere below, a car started. The first of the morning staff arriving for their shift, not knowing what the night had been, not knowing that the house they were arriving to work in had become something different in the last 8 hours. Something still standing, but fundamentally altered, the way a structure looks the same from the outside after the ground beneath it has moved. Junseo Kong looked at Monica Brooks across the desk, in the gray morning light, and felt the particular sensation of a man who has spent 2 decades controlling every variable in his vicinity, discovering that the variables he had managed least carefully were the ones that now held everything together. He opened his mouth to speak. His phone went off again. Not Sungjin's line. The emergency line. The one that bypassed everything, that rang only when the structure itself was at risk. He picked it up. Sungjin's voice, stripped to its barest functional components. Taehyun Cho just ended his police interview. He invoked personal safety concerns and requested immediate protective custody. A pause, tight and short. His daughter is missing from her home in Busan, sometime in the last 2 hours. The mother came home from a night shift, and the child was gone. The word landed in the office like something physical. Junseo stood with the phone against his ear and did not move. Monica was watching his face, and she saw it. The thing that happened there, the thing that went through him like voltage. And she knew from the quality of it that whatever Sungjin had just said was not a manageable problem. It was the kind of problem that changes the shape of everything that comes after it. He said, "How long?" Sungjin said, "The mother's estimate puts the window at 90 minutes to 2 hours. She came home at 6:10. The child was in the apartment when she left for her shift at 9 last night. No signs of forced entry. The building's exterior camera was offline. Technically offline, serviced offline. A maintenance request filed 3 days ago. 3 days ago. Before last night. Before the operation failed. The child had been a contingency from the beginning." "Cho knows," Junseo said. "He was notified simultaneously with us. He's not cooperative right now. He's trying to leave the station. Don't stop him." Silence on the line. "Don't stop him," Junseo said again. "He knows something about where Kwon would move her. He's more useful following his instincts than sitting in an interview room. Put someone on him. Quiet. Don't let him see it." He ended the call. He set the phone down. Monica said, "Whose child?" "Taehyun Cho's daughter." She closed her eyes for 1 second only, then she opened them. Kwon took her as leverage to shut Cho down before his testimony goes further. Junseo was already moving. Not frantically, but with the compressed velocity of a man for whom thinking and moving have always happened at the same speed. He pulled open the desk's lower drawer and removed a secondary phone, the kind that existed off the estate's main communication infrastructure. They mapped Cho's weak point, and they moved on it before we could cover it. We were 40 minutes late. "You sent people to Busan," Monica said. She wasn't accusing. She was assembling. "They weren't there yet." He looked at the secondary phone. 90 minutes. We were 90 minutes too slow. The room held that. Monica stood up. Where would Kwon hold her? He looked at her. "I've been in this house for 4 years," she said. "I've heard things. I've seen documents I wasn't meant to see, the same way I saw everything else. I know at least 4 properties associated with the Kwon network. Not from any declaration, not from anything I communicated to anyone, just from doing my job and paying attention." She held his gaze. "Tell me what you know, and I'll tell you what I know. Right now, that's faster than any other option you have." He looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Kwon has a logistics facility in Uijeongbu, north of the city. It's been used for holding before. It's off the main network, staffed light, accessible without going through the main Seoul routes." "The Uijeongbu address in the Busan portfolio file," Monica said immediately. "There's a land record associated with a shell company, Mirai Industrial Solutions, that appeared in the estate's cross-reference documents 18 months ago. I flagged it in the notebook." She moved to the desk and opened the notebook and found it in 30 seconds. She turned it to face him. Same company, different registered address, but the principal name on the filing is the same. He looked at the notebook entry. He looked at the secondary phone. He made a call. Sung Jin picked up in one ring. Ui Jungbu, Jun Seo said. Mirai Industrial Solutions. Pull the property records and get me a location within 10 minutes. And I need 4 people, not the estate security team, the external unit. I need them moving in 15. He hung up. He looked at Monica. You're going, she said. Not a question. Yes. That arm isn't functional. Functional enough. You have a cracked rib and a head wound and you haven't slept. I'm aware of my inventory, he said flatly. Stay in the estate. Stay with Naomi. Don't communicate with anyone external until I'm back and this is resolved. And if it isn't resolved, he looked at her. If it goes wrong, she said, what happens to us? Sung Jin has instructions, he said. If I'm not back by noon, he has instructions about you and your daughter. What instructions? Safe passage, documents, enough to establish somewhere else. He held her gaze. I told you she wouldn't be touched. That's not conditional on how this morning ends. Monica looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her face, not gratitude exactly, because gratitude was too simple for what the expression contained. It was the look of someone recalculating the person in front of them and arriving at a result that was more complicated than the previous calculation. She said, "Come back." He said nothing. He left. The drive to Uijeongbu took 31 minutes at that hour, which was faster than it should have been, because Jun Seo drove the secondary vehicle himself and drove it the way he did most things when the situation had stripped away the machinery of his position, directly, without ceremony, at a speed that acknowledged the road was a problem to be solved rather than a route to be traveled. Sung Jin had sent the location to the secondary phone, a warehouse property on the eastern edge of the industrial district, registered to Mirai Industrial Solutions, purchased 4 years ago, no active business filings, property taxes paid through a management company. The kind of property that existed to exist, to be a location on paper, to be accessible and deniable and empty except when it wasn't. The external unit, 4 men, none of them from the estate, all of them the kind of people whose professional history was organized around exactly this type of situation, were 3 minutes behind him. They knew not to arrive first. They knew to wait for his rat of the approach before moving. Jun Seo parked 2 blocks from the property and sat for 45 seconds. The industrial district was gray and functional and mostly quiet at this hour, trucks moving in the distance, a shift change somewhere. The particular flat light of a November morning that gave everything the same washed-out tone. The warehouse was a 2-story concrete structure with a loading dock on the south face and 4 small windows on the upper level, 2 of which had light behind them. Light meant people. People meant the child was probably still here, because moving her would have required preparation, and Kwan's people had been in motion since last night, and preparation took time they might not have had. His phone buzzed. A message from Sung Jin. Cho's tail has him on the northern highway. He's coming here. ETA 25 minutes. Jun Seo read it. He thought for 3 seconds. He typed back, "Don't intercept." He got out of the car. The rib made itself known when he moved. A sharp, specific complaint from the left side. The kind of pain that is informational rather than debilitating, that tells you the parameters of what you can do rather than stopping you from doing it. He filed it. He adjusted his movement slightly, protecting the left side without advertising that he was doing so. He crossed the street and moved along the building's north face, where there were no windows and no cameras he could identify, and he did what he had always done in situations that required it. He thought about the structure of the thing rather than its surface. Kwan had the child. Kwan had Yuri somewhere. Kwan had a government asset filing paperwork. Kwan had documentation from the Kang estate. What Kwan did not have, could not yet have, because Taehyun Cho's interview had been moving fast before it stopped, was certainty about how much of his organization's structure Cho had already given to the detective. That uncertainty was leverage. Kwan couldn't move cleanly until he knew the scope of the exposure, and he couldn't know the scope until Cho was either silenced or retrieved. And he couldn't silence or retrieve Cho while Cho was inside a police station, so the child was the mechanism, the thing that would pull Cho out of the station and into the open and give Kwan's people a clear line. The child was bait, which meant she was alive, and she was here, and she was going to stay that way until Cho arrived, because a dead child was a liability and a live child was a leash. Jun Seo reached the building's south corner and stopped. There was a man at the loading dock entrance. Standing, not sitting. Professional attention, not relaxed. He had a jacket that was too heavy for the weather in a way that indicated what was under it. He was looking south, toward the main road, which was the direction from which Cho would approach. Jun Seo pulled back around the corner. His phone. Unit in position. Your signal. He typed, South entry, 1 visible. Upper level, 2 lights. Assess north entry and wait. He waited. 40 seconds. Then, north entry, 1 visible. Ground floor east window, 1 visible from interior. Minimum 4 on site. 4. With a 6-year-old child and a plan that required Cho to arrive and be managed. They hadn't brought more because more meant noise, and noise meant exposure, and Kwan was running a precision operation, not a siege. 4 was manageable. 4 was also 4 armed professionals against Jun Seo Kong with a cracked rib and 3 hours of no sleep, plus 4 external unit members who were good but not infallible. He thought about the child upstairs. He typed, On my signal, north entry first. Draw attention north, I take south. A pause. Then, confirmed. Junso breathed. The rib pushed back. He breathed around it. He moved to the south entry. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not clean. Clean was for situations with more preparation time and better odds. And Junso had learned 20 years ago that the gap between the plan and the execution was where people died. And the only way to close the gap was to move faster than the situation could respond. The signal went north. The sound, a vehicle engine, a shout, something breaking, pulled the dock guard's attention left. Junso came around the corner and closed 12 feet of distance before the guard completed his turn, and the collision was economical and brutal and ended with the guard against the dock's concrete edge and Junseo's left side screaming at him in terms he had to ignore. He went through the south entry door. Ground floor concrete machinery that hadn't been used in years, a folding table with coffee cups and a phone on it, strip lighting 2 of 4 tubes working. The interior guard, the one visible from the east window, was already moving toward the sound of the dock, which meant his back was to Junseo for the 2 seconds that mattered. Junseo didn't stop. The stairs were at the north end of the ground floor, metal, their sound unavoidable. He took them fast anyway, because fast was less information than slow, and he reached the upper landing with his left arm held close and his right hand where it needed to be. Upper level. 2 rooms divided by a temporary partition wall. Light from the left room. Sound from the left room. A voice, adult, male, the specific flat tone of someone maintaining forced calm while managing a situation they want to be somewhere else. And underneath it, smaller sounds. A child's sounds, but not crying. Something more controlled than crying, which was its own kind of data. The door to the left room was not locked. He opened it. 2 men. A child. The child was 6 years old, and she was sitting on a folding chair with her hands in her lap, and she was not crying. She was doing what children sometimes do when they have been frightened past the crying stage and have arrived somewhere quieter and more internal. She was very still, with her eyes open and her face composed in the careful way of a child who has decided that stillness is the correct response to danger. She looked at Junseo. She did not scream. The 2 men moved. The next 90 seconds were the kind that the body remembers differently than the mind does. The mind records sequence and cause and effect, but the body records impact and breath and the specific cost of each movement. Junseo's body recorded the left side every time. The moment when the larger of the 2 men caught him across the shoulder and the world went briefly white at the edges. The table edge. The lamp, which became useful. The sound of the external unit coming through the north stairwell behind him, late by 30 seconds but present. When it ended, both men were on the ground. Junseo was standing. The child was still in the chair. He stood for a moment and breathed. Not calmly, not evenly, but functionally, the kind of breathing that is about getting oxygen into the system rather than communicating anything. His left side was a single sustained note of complaint. There was blood somewhere on his face, possibly from the head wound reopening, possibly new. He looked at the child. She looked at him. "You're not my dad," she said. "No," he said. "Are you here because of my dad?" "Yes." She looked at him for a moment with the assessing directness of a child. "Is he coming?" "He's coming." "Okay," she said, and then after a pause, "I wasn't scared." Junseo looked at her. Something about the way she said it, the particular insistence of it, the way she needed it to be known, hit him in a place he hadn't expected. because she had been scared. It was visible in the careful way she was sitting, in the controlled stillness that wasn't natural to children of 6, in the slight elevation of her shoulders that hadn't come down yet. She had been scared and she had decided to manage it. He had met that quality before, very recently. "I know," he said. He said it seriously, without condescension. "I could tell." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she unclenched her hands from her lap. His phone rang. He turned away and answered. Sungjin. "Cho is on site. He's at the south entrance. He saw the vehicle. He knows you're here. Send him up." He heard Cho before he saw him. Footsteps on the metal stairs that communicated mass and urgency, and a specific kind of desperation that was different from fear. Tae-hyun Cho appeared in the doorway, and he was not the composed enforcer from the night before, the man who had made a quiet decision and walked away. He was a father who had been running towards something for 25 minutes and had arrived not knowing what he was going to find. He found his daughter on a folding chair, unharmed, looking at him with an expression that broke open like a seam giving way. Cho crossed the room. He went to his knees in front of the chair, and he put his hands on either side of his daughter's face, and he looked at her, and the sound he made was not a word. It was something underneath language, the specific noise a person makes when they have been prepared for the worst, and have found instead that the worst did not happen. His daughter said, "Appa." And Tae-hyun Cho, who had killed 11 people and walked away from his daughter's life because he thought distance was protection, put his forehead against hers and shook. Junseo stood at the door and looked at the two men on the floor and listened to his own breathing and felt the left side of his body making its case in sustained and specific terms. The external unit leader appeared at his shoulder. "Property is clear, ground floor secured. 2 in custody, 1 from the dock, 1 from inside." "Good. You're bleeding." "I'm aware." "The rib." "I said I'm aware." He looked at the room, at Cho and his daughter, at the gray morning light coming through the dirty window. "Get a vehicle. We're moving the child to the estate. She needs to be somewhere secure while Cho finishes his interview." He paused. "And I need Yuri Han's location, right now." His phone again. Sungjin. He picked up. "The FIU filing," Sungjin said, and his voice had a new quality, something tight and contained. "Our legal team got a read on it in the last 20 minutes. The Monica Brooks declarations, though the notarization is verifiable as fraudulent. The notary seal number is registered to a firm in Mapogu that has no record of the transaction. It'll take 24 hours to get the formal challenge in front of the right desk, but the document is a forgery, clean and demonstrable." Junso exhaled. "And Yuri?" Silence on the line. Then, "We have her location. She's been at the Han family's Seongbuk-dong property this entire time. She didn't go far." A pause. "Her father is with her. Chairman Han arrived 40 minutes ago." Junso went still. "Chairman Han is there?" "Yes. And he reached out to our legal infrastructure 20 minutes ago through a private channel, his personal attorney." Sungjin paused again, carefully. "He is not aligned with his daughter's operation. He did not know. He's asking for a conversation." The picture reorganized itself. Yuri had run the operation without her father's knowledge. She had used the Han family name as cover, the credibility of it, the protection of it, without the man who owned that name understanding what she was doing with it. Which meant Chairman Han was now sitting in a house with a daughter who had just detonated a bomb under one of the most significant criminal organizations in East Asia, and he was asking for a conversation, which meant he was calculating exactly what it would cost to contain this, and whether containing it was possible. "Tell his attorney I'll call within the hour," Junso said, "and pull the team back from Seongbuk-dong. Nobody moves on that property until I've spoken to him." "Understood." "And get someone to Monica Brooks. Tell her the declaration has been confirmed fraudulent. Tell her—" He stopped. He looked at Cho's daughter, who had her face buried in her father's shoulder now, small hands gripping the back of his jacket. "Tell her both of them are safe." He ended the call. He turned back to the room. Tae-hyun Cho was standing now, his daughter held against his chest with both arms, her legs wrapped around him, her face in his neck. He was looking at Junseo over the top of her head, with an expression that had moved through several things in the last 5 minutes and had arrived somewhere complicated. Something that lived in the overlap between relief and shame, and a debt he did not yet know how to account for. "She goes to the estate," Junso said. "She's safe there until you finish your interview." Cho looked at him. "Your testimony stands," Junseo said. Whatever you've already given, whatever you're going to give, I'm not asking you to change it. That's not what this is. Cho's jaw worked. Then what is it? A child who wasn't supposed to be a variable, Junseo said, getting her out of one. Cho was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his daughter. He looked back up. Why? Junseo thought about yellow star pajamas, about crossed arms, about 7 words delivered without hesitation by someone who did not know enough to be afraid. He said, I know someone else who does the same thing. He moved toward the door. Behind him, Cho held his daughter tighter, and somewhere in the industrial district of Uijeongbu, the November morning was fully arrived and gray and indifferent, and the city below it was already generating its noise and motion and momentum. And in a house in Seongbuk-dong, a woman named Yuri Han was sitting with her father and understanding for the first time that the architecture of everything she had built was about to come down. And in the Kang estate on the hillside, Monica Brooks was sitting beside a sleeping child with a notebook in her lap and waiting for a call that would tell her which direction the morning had broken. And it was all converging now, every thread of it, pulling toward the same hour, the same room, the same... The call to Chairman Han's attorney lasted 11 minutes. Junseo made it from the vehicle on the way back to Seoul, sitting in the passenger seat with his left arm braced against the door and the secondary phone held to his right ear, and the industrial district of Uijeongbu moving past the window in the flat November light. The attorney, a man named Shin, senior partner at a firm that handled the Han family's most sensitive matters, spoke in the careful, densely qualified language of someone who had spent 40 years making sure that words could not be used against the people who paid him. Junseo let him talk for 3 minutes. Then he said, I don't want the attorney. I want the chairman. In person. My estate, 2 hours. Shin started to explain why that was procedurally complex. Junseo said, Tell him what his daughter has cost me. Tell him what it will continue to cost both of us if this becomes a formal proceeding. Tell him that the alternative to this conversation is a version of events that leaves the Han family name in every filing and every record and every piece of testimony that Tae-hyun Cho is currently generating in a police interview room. He paused. Then ask him again whether 2 hours is procedurally complex. Shin went quiet. Shin said he would communicate the message. Junseo ended the call and looked out the window and said nothing for the remainder of the drive. The estate felt different in the morning light. It always looked the same from the outside. The gates, the cameras, the geometry of control and exclusion. But Junseo had learned, in the hours since midnight, that the inside of a thing could change completely, while the outside held its shape. He had built this place to be impenetrable, and he had been penetrated anyway, not through the gates or the security infrastructure, but through the far more available entrance of his own willingness to believe something he wanted to believe. He filed that. He did not intend to make that particular mistake twice. Sung-jin met him at the entrance with a medical kit and a face that communicated he was going to insist on at least a minimal assessment before anything else happened, and Junseo sat in the ground floor study and let the estate's doctor re-examine the rib and reclose the head wound and say things about imaging and rest that Junseo heard and did not respond to. When the doctor was done, Monica was at the door. She looked at him, at the fresh dressing above his eye, at the way he was holding his left side, at the overall evidence of a morning that had cost something physical. And her face did the thing it did, the careful neutrality. But her eyes were doing something different. Something that had moved past the night's calculations into a clearer space. Cho's daughter, she said. Safe. She's here, in the East Wing with Cho. He paused. He stayed with her. He'll go back to the station this afternoon. His testimony will be complete by tomorrow. Monica nodded. She looked at her hands. The declaration. Forged. Sung-jin has the documentation. The challenge will be filed today. He met her eyes. It won't touch you. She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that isn't relief. That's something more complicated than relief. The quiet of a person who has been running a crisis calculation for hours and has just been told the calculation can stop and does not yet know how to stop running it. Thank you, she said. She said it simply, without adornment. He looked at her. You built that notebook for 6 months, he said, alone, without telling me, to protect your daughter. Yes, and you walked into my office at 6 a.m. with it. I didn't have a better option. Most people, he said, in your position in this house, knowing what you knew about the situation, most people would have found a quieter way to disappear. She looked at him steadily. I have a daughter who calls this house home. Quiet disappearing isn't something I have the option of doing. A pause. And I was right about Yuri. I needed that to matter to someone eventually. He held her gaze. It mattered. She nodded once. She moved to leave. Monica. She stopped. When this is settled, he said, when the filings are resolved and Cho's testimony is on record, and the Quan Syndicate is a legal proceeding rather than a functional organization, I want to revisit what your position here looks like, what your situation here looks like. He paused. You've been operating as household management. That's not what you actually do. We both know that. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but a careful recognition. We can have that conversation, she said. She left. Junseo sat with his rib and the morning light and the estate settling around him. The sound of the household beginning its normal operations because that was what households did. They generated their rhythms regardless of what the night had been. And he thought about the meeting that was coming and what it was going to require him to be. Chairman Han Byung-soo arrived at 10:47. He came alone, without the attorney, which was either confidence or calculation, and was probably both. He was 63, with the particular bearing of a man who had inherited significant power and then significantly augmented it. Not the ease of someone born to everything, but the denser assurance of someone who has spent his life converting leverage into permanence. He wore a gray suit and no tie, and he looked like he had not slept either, which was the first honest thing Junseo had seen from the Han family in 14 months. They sat in the formal meeting room, not the office. The office was still being restored, and there was something appropriate about neutral ground. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Han said, I did not know. I know you didn't, Junseo said. Han looked at him. You believe that? I verified it. Your communication records with your daughter's operational contacts are clean. Nothing prior to last night. She kept it from you. He paused. She kept it from everyone who would have stopped her. Han was quiet. He looked at the table. He looked like a man in the specific pain of a parent confronting the full dimensions of what their child has done. Not the anger, which comes first and is easier, but the thing underneath the anger, which is the question of how it happened and whether the answer implicates you. She told me the engagement was strategic, Han said, that she believed in the alignment, that she wanted it. He stopped. I thought she meant it. She may have, Junseo said. Parts of it. People who operate the way she operates, they don't always know which parts are real. He said it without bitterness. Factually, the way he would describe any complex system. It doesn't change what she did. No, Han said. It doesn't. They sat with that for a moment. What do you want? Han said. I want the FIU filing withdrawn. Today, not procedurally, today. I want the Quan-connected documentation that left this estate returned through your legal channels within 48 hours. I want Park Dae-won, your daughter's contact in the assembly, to remove himself from any proceedings related to this organization permanently, beginning this morning. Junseo's voice was level and unhurried. In exchange, the Han family name appears in none of the Quan proceeding filings. Yuri's role is documented as a private individual acting without family knowledge. The operational records that implicate your pharmaceutical holdings as inadvertent cover for the operation are sealed. Han was looking at him. She is still my daughter, Han said carefully. She will face a legal process, Junseo said. I can't prevent that. Cho's testimony is already generating warrants, but the scope of what she faces and the degree to which it spreads to your family and your holdings is a variable. I'm offering you a version of this where the variable is managed. In exchange for everything you've listed. Yes. Han looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at Junseo with the specific, stripped-down attention of a man who has removed all of the social machinery and is seeing clearly for the first time in what is probably a very long time. She thought she was building something, Han said. She told me once, years ago, before any of this, that the Quan Syndicate's approach was more sophisticated than what the Kang organization had built, that Quan thought in longer arcs. He paused. I told her she was wrong. I told her Junseo Kang was the most patient man in any room he ever entered. He stopped. I think she wanted to prove she was more patient than both of you. Junseo was quiet. I think she was, for 14 months, he said finally. Han looked at him. Something in his face broke open slightly. not into emotion, but into a kind of honesty that was its own form of damage. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what she did in this house, for what nearly happened here." "I know you are." "My apologies don't rebuild what she took apart." "No," Junso said. "They don't, but they're a foundation for what comes next." He held Han's gaze. "Do we have an agreement?" Han was quiet for 10 seconds. Then, "Yes." They did not shake hands. They did not need to. Agreements between men of their particular kind lived in the quality of the silence following a word, not in gestures. Both of them understood this. Both of them stood, and Han moved toward the door, and at the threshold he stopped. "The child," Han said, without turning. "I heard what she did. Last night." Junso said nothing. "How old?" Han said. 4. Han was quiet for a moment. She stopped Tae-hyun Cho. "She reminded him of something he'd forgotten," Junso said. "That's what Monica said." "I think that's accurate." Han turned then, just slightly. Not fully back, but enough to show his profile. "My daughter spent 14 months learning to be patient enough to dismantle a criminal empire." He paused. "A 4-year-old girl spent 4 seconds being brave enough to stop one." He looked at nothing in particular. "There's something in that." He left. Thud. Yuri Han was arrested at 2:15 in the afternoon. She was at the Seongbuk-dong property when the warrants arrived, sitting in her father's house, which was either a failure of nerve or a decision that this was as far as she was going to run. And Junso suspected, from everything he had learned about her over 14 months, that it was the latter. She did not struggle. She did not perform for the officers. She came out of the house in the same composure she had always worn, the specific composure of someone who had understood from the beginning that all operations eventually conclude and had made her peace with conclusion as a concept. One of the arresting officers later mentioned that she had looked as they led her toward the vehicle as though she was finishing something rather than being stopped from finishing it. He couldn't explain what he meant by that. It was just the quality of her bearing. Junseo received confirmation of the arrest from Sungjin at 2:22. He read it and set the phone down and sat for a moment. He was in the garden parlor off the east corridor. Not his office, not the formal rooms, but the small, unremarkable room where Naomi sometimes sat because the afternoon light came through the windows at an angle that was good for coloring. He had come here, he realized, without consciously deciding to. He had just arrived here, between one thing and the next. Min Jae-kwan's organization came apart over the following 18 hours with the particular speed of structures that have been undermined before they collapse. Tae-hyun Cho's complete testimony, delivered in full that afternoon, after Cho had satisfied himself that his daughter was somewhere the Kwan network could not reach her, was the documentation the investigating team had been building toward for 3 years. The financial intelligence from the estate documentation, combined with Cho's operational knowledge, gave the proceeding a clarity that made delay pointless. Kwan's legal counsel requested a meeting with the prosecution within 6 hours of the testimony being completed. The raids that followed were not dramatic. They were administrative. The end of something that had been hollow for longer than anyone had realized. Park Dae-won resigned from the National Assembly the following morning, citing health reasons, which was the kind of language that covered a variety of actual reasons without clarifying any of them. The FIU filing was withdrawn. The Incheon documentation, the package that Yuri had tried to retrieve, that had started the whole sequence of the night, remained in the Kang estate's secondary safe, where it continued to function as what it had always been: leverage over a corrupt councilman who would now spend the foreseeable future making decisions with the weight of that leverage in his peripheral vision. Some things resolved, some things simply changed configuration. 3 weeks after the night that changed everything, Junseo found Naomi under his desk. It was a Tuesday afternoon, pale winter light coming through the office windows, the estate operating in its normal register. He had been at the desk for 2 hours reviewing the restructured organizational documents, real organizational documents, the kind that reflected an operation that had been cleaned and reduced and rebuilt on a foundation that had fewer comfortable assumptions in it. He had spent the 3 weeks since the night doing what he had been putting off for years, removing the people whose loyalty had been to his position rather than to him, consolidating around the few relationships that had proven themselves in conditions that stripped everything else away. The list of the latter was shorter than he would have liked. It was also more accurate than any list he had made before. He felt the presence under the desk before he registered what it was: a small warmth, a slight shift in the quality of the air near his feet, and then a sound that was unmistakably crayons on paper. He looked down. Naomi was on her back under the desk, one knee bent, Gerald wedged between her arm and the desk leg. A drawing pad balanced on her chest. She was coloring something with fierce attention. She had apparently been there for some time. "How did you get past security?" he said. "Mr. Kim let me in," she said without looking up. "I told him I was visiting. He's been briefed about unauthorized access." "I'm not unauthorized. I'm Naomi." She said this with the complete confidence of someone who does not recognize the distinction as meaningful. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at the drawing pad. "What are you making?" "It's you," she said. "But a better one." He was quiet. "The other one I made you looked wrong," she continued. "The tiger. The legs were wrong. I looked at a real tiger and I counted the legs, and there's only 4. She added a heavy line to whatever she was drawing. "I'm fixing it." He sat back in his chair and looked at the window and felt something shift in his chest. Not dramatically, not the way things shift in stories, but in the quiet, specific way that things shift when you are sitting in a room that was recently the site of violence, and the room has become ordinary again, and the ordinariness of it is not erasure but continuation, and continuation is the only form of survival that actually counts. He said, "Naomi." "What?" "That night, 3 weeks ago. Do you remember it?" She was quiet for a moment, still coloring. "The night with the scary men." "Yes." "I remember Gerald fell in the hallway, and I had to go back for him. And then I heard Mama's voice, and she sounded different." She turned a page. "Are you sad about it?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "No, not sad. Mama was sad for a few days. She made a face." "What kind of face?" "The kind she makes when she's thinking about something hard. Like when she's doing the budget and the numbers don't fit." He almost smiled. He caught it. "She's better now." "Yeah," Naomi agreed. "She laughs at breakfast again." She held her drawing up, inspecting it from below. "Mr. June, did I do a good thing that night?" The question was simple and direct, and he recognized in it the genuine architecture of a child's moral reasoning. Not performed, not looking for reassurance, but actually asking, actually wanting to know whether the thing she had done mapped onto the categories of right and wrong in the way she suspected it did. He thought about Tae Hyun Cho, about a man standing in an industrial corridor above his daughter, shaking, about a conversation that had happened because Cho had walked into a police station at 5 in the morning because something had broken open in him in a dark corridor when a child had planted herself in the center of something dangerous and refused to move, about a 6-year-old girl who had spent the night of her abduction being still and controlled and telling the first adult who came through the door that she hadn't been scared because she had decided that was the correct response to danger, and she was managing it. Like recognizing, like, across a generation, across every difference of circumstance. "Yes," he said. "You did a good thing." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to the drawing. "I know," she said. "I just wanted to hear it." He put his hands back on the desk. He picked up the documents he had been reviewing. He read 3 lines and put them down again. He said, "When you're done with the tiger, can I keep it?" Naomi considered this with appropriate gravity. "You can have it if you put it somewhere good, not in a drawer, somewhere you can see it." "Agreed." "Okay," she said. "Then yes." Monica found him there an hour later. Junseo at his desk, Naomi asleep on her back beneath it with Gerald on her chest, and the completed drawing face up on the floor beside her. The tiger had 4 legs. 2 of them were still going in approximately the wrong direction. There was something that might have been a crown on its head, and something that was either a sword or a very unusual tail, and the whole thing had been colored in 3 separate shades of orange because Naomi had apparently used 1 crayon down to nothing and needed 2 more to finish. Monica stood in the doorway and looked at the drawing, and then looked at Junseo. He was sitting with the restructuring documents in front of him, and the drawing visible at the corner of his desk where he had propped it against the lamp, and he was not looking at the documents. He was looking at the drawing with the specific, unguarded attention of a man who has temporarily forgotten to perform anything. Monica did not say anything. She leaned against the doorframe and crossed her arms and looked at the room, at the office that had been cleaned and reassembled after the night it had been broken, at the man behind the desk who had also been cleaned and reassembled and was also still working on the reassembly. at her daughter sleeping under the desk of the most feared criminal organization leader in East Asia with a stuffed giraffe and a clear conscience and no idea at all that any of this was unusual. After a while, Junseo looked up and saw her standing there. "She's asleep," he said. "I can see that. She's been here for 2 hours. She told me she was going to visit you. Mr. Kim let her in." "Mr. Kim," Monica said, "is terrified of her." Junseo looked at the drawing. "She made me a better tiger." Monica looked at the drawing too. She was quiet for a moment. "She fixed the legs. 4 of them. 2 are still wrong. 4 is an improvement." "Yes," he said, "it is." The afternoon light moved across the office floor the way light does in winter, slowly, at a low angle, throwing long shadows that made ordinary furniture look significant. Monica uncrossed her arms and came into the room and sat in the chair across from his desk. The same chair she had sat in at 6 in the morning, 3 weeks ago, with her notebook, and her 3 pages, and the full weight of everything she had been carrying alone. She sat differently now. Not relaxed. Monica Brooks had not relaxed fully in this house in 4 years, possibly in much longer, but settled. The posture of someone who has decided that this room is a room they are permitted to be in without performing preparedness at every moment. "I've been thinking about the conversation you mentioned," she said, "about what the position here actually looks like. And I have conditions." She said it without apology, without softening, not requests. Conditions. He looked at her. "Tell me." "Naomi's education is not contingent on my employment status. Whatever arrangement we make, she has continuity regardless of what happens between you and me professionally." She held his gaze. "Her situation is not leverage, not a variable, not something that changes based on organizational circumstances." "Agreed. I want a documented scope of responsibility, not informal, not we'll figure it out as we go. I want it written, I want it signed, and I want it to reflect what I actually do rather than what the title says I do." "Agreed. And I want to know, formally, not implied, that the notebook was the right thing, that bringing it forward was the right thing. Not because I need validation, but because I need to know that in this organization, when someone sees something and documents it and brings it forward at significant personal risk, that action is protected and respected rather than tolerated." She paused. "Because if it's not, then I can't operate effectively here. And I think you know by now that effective operation for me is worth more than comfortable silence." Junseo looked at her for a long moment. "The notebook," he said, "was the right thing. Bringing it forward was the right thing. The 6 months it took to build it was reasonable, given your circumstances and the standard of evidence required. All of that is on record in my assessment of the situation." He paused. "And you're right that I know what effective operation from you is worth. I've known it for 4 years. I was slow to formalize it." Monica nodded. "That's 3 conditions," he said. "Is there a 4th? She glanced at Naomi under the desk. Something crossed her face, brief, unguarded, the specific look of a mother watching a sleeping child that is nobody's business but hers. "No 4th, she said. "Those are the ones that matter." "Then we have an agreement." "We do." Neither of them marked it further than that. There was no ceremony available for what they were, which was 2 people who had survived the same night from different positions and had arrived at a mutual understanding that was built on what had actually happened rather than on what either of them had intended. It was not friendship exactly. It was something more durable than friendship. The specific bond of shared accountability, of having been tested by the same event and found, each of them, to be more than the other had initially calculated. The light continued its slow transit across the office floor. Naomi made a sound in her sleep. Not a word, just a small sound of adjustment, and her hand tightened on Gerald for a moment and then relaxed. Junseo Kang, who had spent 20 years building an empire on the premise that control was the only reliable foundation, looked at the sleeping child under his desk and the drawing propped against his lamp, and the woman sitting across from him who had trusted him with the most important thing she owned, and felt the structure of something shift, not break, not collapse, but genuinely shift into a configuration that was different from what it had been. Not softer, not simpler, just more honest about what it was made of. He picked up the restructuring documents again. He read 3 lines. He put them down. He looked at the tiger with its 4 legs and its possible crown and its very unusual tail, and he thought about a child who had stood in a dark hallway and refused to move, and he thought about what it had cost and what it had prevented, and what it had, in the final accounting, saved. Not just his life, which was the obvious calculation, but something less obvious and more permanent. He thought about Tae Hyun Cho in a Busan apartment right now, learning again how to be a father to a daughter who had spent a night alone in a warehouse and come out of it telling the first adult who arrived that she hadn't been scared. He thought about what it meant that neither of those children, not Naomi, not Cho's daughter, had broken under things that had broken men twice their size and age. He thought, they know something we spent too long forgetting. He did not say this. He was not a man who said things like this. But he thought it. He picked up the restructuring documents a third time, and this time he read them through to the end. Beneath the desk, Naomi slept. The estate held its shape against the winter afternoon. And in Seoul, in the weeks that followed, the Kwan Syndicate became a legal proceeding and then a record, and then a cautionary story told in certain rooms by people who understood what the story was actually about. Yuri Han went through a process that was not gentle and was not brief. Tae Hyun Cho testified completely and was sentenced to 3 years with reduction for cooperation and served 18 months and came out the other side to a daughter who was almost 9 by then and who had decided, in the way children decide things, that what had happened was part of the story of her life and not the whole story, and who received him back with the unearned grace that children are sometimes capable of and that adults spend their whole lives trying to deserve. And on a hillside north of Seoul, in an estate that had been rebuilt from its compromised foundations into something more honest about what it was, a little girl with bright curls grew another year older and continued to ask hard questions and color pictures and call a feared man by a name that was not his name. And he continued to keep every drawing she gave him somewhere he could see it, because he had made an agreement, and he kept his agreements. And also because the tiger had gotten better every time, the legs gradually correcting themselves toward accuracy, the proportions slowly resolving into something more like the real thing. Not perfect, better. Which was, in the end, the only version of things worth building toward. Fade out.